you don't really feel like, just when you're doing all the asana work and you're doing even the breath work, that anything is happening internally. You still kind of stay the same person. Your life doesn't really change. But then you meet someone like Mahesh Yogi, who's then saying, oh no, do this transcendental meditation and you will gain access to greater realms within yourself. The Yoga Connection with Zorananda is a deep dive into the world of yoga, exploring the rich history of tradition, methodology, and practices both ancient and modern. Follow along as yoga is explored through solo episodes to guest interviews to understand its vast reach around the world. Hello and welcome to the Yoga Connection. My name is Zorananda, and today we are diving into part 3 of my Asana series, where I'm going into the waves of yoga that came into the West from India. So I started with the late 1800s and early 1900s with Swami Vivekananda and Paramahansa Yogananda, into the 1930s, stretching to the 1970s with Krishnamacharya, BKS Iyengar, Batabi Joyce, and a little bit on Bikram. So that was wave 1 to wave 2. Now we're entering into wave 3, where there are 2 yogis, or in this case, I would say like Indian mystics, that became prominent from the 1970s and onwards. I would say, from the 1970s, 1980s, up until the 2000s. And these 2 were Osho, otherwise, I think his given name was Acharya Rajneesh, and Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. So this one's going to be a tricky one, because even though this series is about asana and the physical practice, I'm basically taking you through this journey of how yoga was twisted in the West. So, coming from the first wave, establishing yoga as a spiritual practice that was relatable to, say, quote unquote, Western religions like Christianity, and kind of using that as a way to get a foothold into the West through Vivekananda and Yogananda. And then because yoga was established in the West like that, it paved the way for Vinyasa yoga to come in. It paved the way for Bikram and Patabi Joyce and Iyengar to then showcase what their yoga was, and to kind of piggyback off of this whole new upcoming like physical fitness trend that was showing up in the United States and Canada. And so from that point, you have this opening that emerges. So now that, millions of people are practicing yoga, it's the 1970s, it's the 1980s, they're coming out of like the hippie movement, and there's a lot of psychedelic use, there's a lot of drug use. And so the mind of the average American that's taking on yoga practices and fitness practices and looking for more meaning in their life and looking for new spiritual practices, it suddenly dawns on these other kind of Indian mystics that they can take advantage of the Western mind in a new way. So at this point, the physical yoga practice is still running wild. Like, everybody loves it. So, the prominence of the second wave is still going strong, but now there's this third wave coming that introduces yoga as a cult. And this is where things get problematic. And you'll see just, in this one, how problematic it gets, because for whatever reason, cults become super problematic, not only in the United States, but in Europe and all over the world. You have this new kind of influence where you have a figurehead who's kind of rubbing up against the grain of religion and spirituality. There's this kind of rebellious kind of outlook on society and on life that starts to take shape. And so let's start with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, because that's the one that I know little about, but just kind of going into who he was and what influence that he had. So this guy is notably the Beatles guru. He was also the guru for the Beach Boys, but most notably the Beatles. That after, I believe, like the first or second album of the Beatles, they had a bit of an identity crisis. They were coming out of the 50s and the 60s, or coming out of the 60s, that like old kind of 50s rock was waning. They needed a new sound. And so they went to India and found this guru, Mahesh Yogi, and it totally changed their view of making music. They were introduced to Indian classics and Indian music and ragas and new kind of instruments, and suddenly from the 70s onwards, they're making all this like crazy kind of psychedelic rock, where even in some of the music they're using sitars and they're using bansuri flutes, I think. And so Mahesh Yogi then becomes this figure in paving the way for influencing culture. And that's at a cost, right? Like him and his organization, the organizations that are started in the United States from his followers, end up massing hundreds of millions of dollars. Where it's saying here that in 2008 the organization placed the value of the United States assets at about 300 million. So there's this very clear understanding that the United States becomes this untapped market for gaining a lot of wealth and gaining a lot of attention for what they're doing, right? So in Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's case, he's known to have like some kind of enlightened experience early off at a young age. And there's this sense that in that period of time, there are these Indian mystics that go through some kind of profound change, some kind of profound experience, and that opens them up for this opportunity to create a teaching and to spread it across the world. And how that happens is bewildering, right? Like, how is it that this random normal dude from India is getting this opportunity? Why is it him? Why isn't it just any of the other billion people that live in India? But when you start to read into his history, it starts to make sense, right? That, he belonged to the Kayashta caste, which is a caste of scribes in India. And so he's brought up in this like religious world, and he studied physics at the Allahabad University. He earned a degree, and so he's educated. And not only is he educated, he's brought up in a higher standard of living than normal people. And so if you were to like think of terms of like karma, that in his upbringing and where he is in the timeline of things, he's positioned in a very interesting point in history where the doors of bringing yoga to the West have been blown wide open. And now there's just a flood of energy that's going towards the United States from India and into the rest of the world to make an impact on culture and society. And in his case, it's a huge impact, right? He influenced the Beatles, and the Beatles turned around and made all this crazy music that ended up, selling millions and millions of copies, doing crazy world tours. And as we know about music, music can be really hypnotic. And look at like the Beatles craze, like it's systematically shaped the way that music is made. They even innovated how to record music. I remember watching a video about Paul McCartney recording bass for I can't remember which song it was, but just the way that it was recorded, that it was like through this speaker, that they used the speaker itself as a microphone. And no one had ever thought about that. And it was a way to kind of add this kind of texture to the bass that he was playing and to turn it into a more like grungy kind of sound. And so my thought is, if the Beatles didn't go to India and they didn't have this experience with Maharishi and whatever, would they have really innovated the music industry? Would they have really blown up the way that they did? And in my opinion, I don't think so. Even though it was such a short stint, right? That they went to India and they weren't there for very long. I think just like a few months or something, and they came back and they were just in rough shape. Like India at that time in the 70s was still, especially going north out of like Delhi and the big cities, that it was still rough terrain and it was still very much wild in a jungle to get through. Like even going through Rishikesh and getting to the Beatles ashram, at that time it would have been just super wild to get through. And so this wave of yoga is kind of detracting away from the physical practice, because the heralds of the spiritual practice are still there. So 70s, 80s, 90s, those three are still super prominent. And so there's this like new window that's being opened, and someone like Mahesh Yogi, who creates a transcendental meditation, kind of takes this advantage of, and I don't think this is his like personal thought process. I think this is just in like the zeitgeist, and this is just in the organization, where it's like, in order to get these teachings through to a mass of people, we're going to need to plug into people that already have a massive following. So then you think of the Beach Boys and you think of the Beatles, and they already have millions and millions of fans. And so, if they come to our ashram and we teach them transcendental meditation, we can end up piggybacking off that, and end up, having thousands and thousands of people coming to our ashram every year, which ends up happening, right? Right. So it says here, and I'm just reading this stuff off of Wikipedia, but there's a section with the Association of the Beatles. It says, in 1967, the Maharishi's fame increased and his movement gained greater prominence when he became the, quote, spiritual advisor to the Beatles. Though he was already well known among young people in the UK and had already had numerous public appearances that broadened the band's attention. Following the Beatles' endorsement of transcendental meditation during 1967 and 1968, the Maharishi appeared on American magazine covers such as Life, Newsweek, Time, and many others. He gave lectures to capacity crowds at the Felt Forum in New York City and Harvard's Sanders Hall. He also appeared on The Tonight Show and Today TV shows. So that's wild, right? So like, not only is he embraced by the Beatles, the whole Western world just opens their doors to them. And you kind of have to wonder why. Like, why is that happening? Like, why is he being embraced, right? And So it goes on to say he and the Beatles met in London in August 1967 when George Harrison and his wife Pattie Boyd urged their friends to attend the Maharishi's lecture at the Hilton on Paris Lane. The band members went to study with the Maharishi in Bangor, Wales, before traveling to Rishikesh, India. In February 1968, to, quote, devote themselves fully to his instruction, Ringo Starr and his wife Maureen left after 10 days. The group's most dedicated students, George Harrison and John Lennon, departed with their wives 16 days later, and Paul McCartney and Jane Astor left after 5 weeks. So they were there for even less time. They were there for like a month. But like, look how much of a profound impact that had going forward. So not only on the music industry and the Beatles, but also on Maharishi and his organization. To the point where, you know, they're getting exposure from crazy magazines like Time magazines. And so why I'm going into these ones is because this is where things twist and it starts to make a negative impact towards cultism and the vying for power over consciousness. And that's essentially what is happening. So whenever you have a person that's a figurehead of an organization like this, and they're expounding like great wisdom and knowledge, and they're telling you that they have the secrets to unlock your consciousness and enlightenment, that can be really powerful. And so if you're a yoga practitioner and you're starting out doing asana and breath work, and you know you've been doing it for years, and sure, you know, you're flexible and you have a strong body, and it kind of just plateaus for a period of time, and the plateau is in how you are as a person. You don't really feel like, just when you're doing all the asana work and you're doing even the breath work, that anything is happening internally. You still kind of stay the same person. Your life doesn't really change. But then you meet someone like Mahesh Yogi, who's then saying, oh no, do this transcendental meditation and you will gain access to greater realms within yourself. That becomes so appealing. And you look back at doing work with, like, you know, Bikram, or doing work with Iyengar and Patabi Joyce, where you're like, yeah, sure, you know, I can do all these like crazy postures, but you know, I'm now wanting to investigate something deeper in myself. And then now there's this turning point into a new kind of experience. And then there's Mahesh Yogi, and then he has the credibility. You're thinking to himself, wow, he was the guru of the Beatles, of the Beach Boys, and he's been on Time magazine, and he's traveled around the United States, and he's been on like the Tonight Show. You know, this guy must be legit. And then so you start investing time and energy, and you start doing the transcendental meditation, and suddenly you're having like what you think are these profound experiences, and that's where things start to turn, and that's when you may not realize that, you know, with some of these yogis and some of these mystics, that for the most part they're kind of making all this stuff up. When you start to learn that, like, oh, he has this like secret meditation technique that'll teach you how to levitate, but then all you're doing is hopping around and making noises out of your mouth, and he's like, yeah, this is like the frog meditation, and you have to like hop around like a frog. But people get captured so strongly that they look at those techniques and they're like, yeah, this is legit, right? And but the thing is that kind of inevitably there's like a kind of turn of events. And like I said, I don't know too much about Mahesh Yogi, but I think for the most part, like he was legitimately revered for what he was doing, and but it's in this vein where it kind of opens the doors for other people to start to recognize that there's a market here. It's like, oh, what Mahesh Yogi has proved is that you can make a lot of money very quickly. And it's very possible to gain a huge amount of followers and for you to make an impact on the planet so that there's like a weight to who you are as a person, right? So there's a point here that says in 2003, David Lynch began a fundraising project to raise $1 billion on behalf of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi to build a meditation center large enough to hold 8,000 skilled practitioners. And so there are people in the world that suddenly want to do crazy things just like that, like raise $1 billion. That's insane. And then the like influence that you can have is a part of that power that kind of exists in your influence, right? So there's the second point here that's like Maharishi ordered a suspension of TM training in Britain in 2005 due to his opposition to Prime Minister Tony Blair's decision to support the Iraq war. The Maharishi said that he did not want to waste the, quote, beautiful nectar of TM on a scorpion nation. He lifted the ban after Blair's resignation in 2007. During this period, skeptics were critical of some of Maharishi's programs, such as a $10 trillion plan to end poverty through organic farming in poor countries and a $1 billion plan to use meditation groups to end conflict. So it starts to form a picture that suddenly the utilization of yoga works hand in hand with the utilization of power, and that you can become this person who has influence over the world that is similar to like what governments have and similar to what royal families have or large corporations, that suddenly as this like notable spiritual leader that you can kind of throw your weight around because you have all these followings, you have all this banked money, you have all this property. But as we see, that's just not the case, and that there is a bit of a glaze over it that's kind of like masking what is actually happening underneath. And that leads to the great Osho, Rajneesh. And this is where I think, and this is my own opinion, I'd have to look at this a little bit deeper, but this is where I think the desire for cults in America like really started to bubble up. That it kind of became obvious, maybe not obvious, but it became notable that you could amass wealth really quickly and you could influence people and you can influence consciousness. And we not only see that in like yoga cults, but we also see that in other religious cults. Like look at the Jonestown or Waco, Texas with David Koresh, or even some newer ones like I think it's Nexium. There's one out of New York called Nexium. And there was all kinds of actors that were a part of it. But I'll save that one for a little bit later because that's a newer one. That's, from the late 90s into the 2000s. And so now moving into Osho, even when you look at like his Wikipedia, immediately it's telling you like, um, you know, right at the bat, Rajneesh, also commonly known as Osho, was an Indian god man, philosopher, mystic, founder of the Rajneesh movement. Rajneesh experienced a spiritual awakening in 1953 at the age of 21, following several years in academia. And so you have this common trend of these like Indian men who proclaim that they've had some kind of profound, um, enlightened experience. And then that paves the way for their strong drive and desire to amass a following, that they start going around all over India. Then as soon as they make enough money, they can then start outreaching to the United States. And through that, they're making connections with people all along the way. And I think out of the two, Osho to me is the most controversial, and it has to do with later when he came to the United States and his like kind of business partner or whoever, her name is Sheila, that it becomes evident what the intention is for amassing the kind of following that they have. And all along the way, when you read through the Wikipedia, all along the way it's controversy. Like he establishes himself somewhere and he grows a following and he brings in like just a mass amount of people, and then he goes against the grain. And there's like bits in here where he has a significant influence from communism and anarchistic kind of style of governance, through a lot of literature that he's reading, to a point where he was almost assassinated because this person thought that he was a part of the CIA. And there's a part of me that thinks like, could there be kind of like some influence underneath the scenes, where, could there be this like kind of grooming that allows them to start coming in and making influences? If you're an agency and you're looking at how you can influence the consciousness of people, of your own people of other countries, when you see someone like this that suddenly can amass a following of people really quickly, I think you would be watching them pretty closely. Like, I don't think world agencies are going to be so naive to think that like, oh yeah, we'll just let him do what he does and watch what happens. Like, I think they got their fingers in there somehow. Like, can you prove it? Like, probably not. But out of everybody in the world, these are the guys. You know what I mean? Like, why isn't it just some other random guy? And so in my mind, there's suspicion. It's like, it's a subjective thing. You can have your suspicions. You can't really prove it. What you can prove in this case is the ineffectiveness of their teachings long term, right? That because they become just problematic, it's important to see the contradictions that are just evident. Like, in Osho's upbringing and in his time spent in university and his like influence in communism, he says something like this. Quote, "I have been interested in communism from my very childhood, communist literature. Perhaps there is no book that is missing from my library. I have signed and dated each book before 1950. Small details are so vivid before me because that was my first entry into the intellectual world. First, I was deeply interested in communism, but finding that is a corpse, I became interested in anarchism. That was also a Russian phenomenon." So like Prince Kropotkin, Bakunin, Leo Tolstoy, all three were anarchists, no state, no government in the world. And which is super ironic and contradictory because once he gets to the United States and once he has his like compound, the like 64,000 acres in Oregon, he suddenly amasses a massive wealth, and he's known to have, like 23 Rolls Royces, and he's got like properties all over the world, and he's just making hand over fist money. So how can you start by saying that you're a communist and you believe in this like no government and anarchistic way of living, but then you're rich as fuck and you have like wealth beyond measure, you wear Rolexes, and you know what I mean? So like there's this thing that rubs against the grain of what they're saying and what they're doing that just doesn't make sense, that they are a living contradiction, and there's a mask that they're wearing, and because they're shifting into becoming a cult and it inevitably become a cult, that their downfall is inevitable because of corruption that is within the organization. And largely, I think it's due to a mismanagement of their teachings and what their original goal was. Like my teacher is a proponent of the Yoga Sutras and the second sutra, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, which means unifying the fluctuations of the mind with the original state of consciousness. So when you start something, your original state of consciousness, your original thought, that is what starts the wave of growth and inspiration towards the thing that you're doing and how it builds on itself. And so if you go against your original state of consciousness, if you take that wave away, then the energy that's within that inevitably crashes away. And there's going to be a point where if you decide to go against what you originally stood for and you didn't even realize you did this, the whole thing is going to start crumbling beneath you and it's going to be taken away. Just watch Wild Wild Country on Netflix. It's this whole docuseries on Osho and Rajneesh and Sheila, and it's hugely eye-opening. And the thing that I want to get to here is like the reason why cults don't work is because you'll have someone internally that starts to vie for the power that you have. And that's essentially what had happened with Osho, that Sheila started taking over. And the thing that was speculated was that Osho was being drugged, that he was giving some kind of like pharmaceuticals. And like, so when we see him doing his lectures, a lot of his lectures, he's just reading off of something. It's not him in the moment expounding that stuff anymore. Like in the past he would have done that, but then when you see him in his like weird gray cap and like long white beard and that weird like kind of white-ish gray silver robe and his long fingernails, is that he has material that he's reading, and when you look at him, he looks like he's medicated. But they kind of use that as a mystique of like, oh, he's in this deep meditative like state of consciousness and he's like propounding these truths and, he has this written stuff. But my suspicion is that Sheila and her team are writing that stuff, and now he's just a figurehead and he's just a placeholder for people to gawk at. And they're benefiting off it, and she's benefiting off of all the money that's coming in from what they're doing, to the point where, you watch the documentary and it's like they went to such an ordeal to try to kind of like take over the county of the ranch was in, that they like bust in homeless people to vote so that they would be in the position of power in the county. And I think it was like to become like the mayor or something, or the governor. Like it was crazy the extent of that they went into, that they're like, they even like poisoned people with salmonella in the water supply. So what I'm getting at here is that for some weird reason, when you look at the timeline of yoga being introduced to the West, that by the 80s and by the 90s, it took this like sour turn into like cultism, and it took this sour turn into using the population of people for your own personal benefit. And it was largely because the people weren't established really truly in their own practice. That when you look at the like the masses of people that were doing the strong vinyasa and hot yoga stuff, is that a lot of them were converted to these other yoga schools and these other mystic schools on the promise that they'll be able to gain some yogic insight into some secret way of becoming enlightened, when really that was just a trap to funnel money from them. And this is why I'm so anti-cult, and I will never like create anything like that. And it's why I'm a proponent of my teacher school, and I think that's good enough. I think when you have a real legit school founded and run by a teacher who is very legit, there's no reason to make an offshoot to then try to like make it better, when, you know, in my mind, in my eyes, what my teacher has done is that it is really an authentic upgrade to the systematization of yoga in general. And so when I look at people like Osho and I look at people like Mahesh Yogi, that, you know, out of the two, I think Mahesh Yogi was, you know, the more benevolent of them, where Rajneesh and Osho were definitely more malevolent, and they were taken by the corruption and the desire for power and control over people, just by how the inner workings of their organization was corrupted by someone like Sheila. And it almost becomes unavoidable. And you'll see that in my next one, because my next podcast, that's kind of the fourth part of this, goes into my own experiences, because it kind of it goes right into the current age of the next yoga wave, and how this third yoga wave started pretty good, then became corrupted, and then became better, because then you have people like my teacher, Yogi Rishi Vishwaketu, and somewhat of Sadhguru, and a few others, that then kind of reclaim the yoga wave, that kind of leads into the fourth wave of where we are now. And so it's my thought that what Osho did is he then opened up this part of the third wave of yoga to inspire other Westerners to start their own cults. And then now you have this whole new branch of using yoga and using spirituality and like kind of Eastern mysticism to propose yourself as some enlightened being. And that's not to say that these people aren't having their own personal religious experience. That's not to say that these people aren't having their own personal religious experiences. That's not to say that these people aren't having their own personal religious experiences. It's just that it's really understanding the potency of it and the authenticity of that experience that's going to justify why they want a following and why they want to help people the way that they do. Because, like I said earlier, I think they always starts genuine. I think they always start with this like hope that what they know and what they're inspired to do is going to help people. Um, but I think there's this underlining pressure just being born in a capitalistic society that you almost can't help but utilize your um enlightened experience as a way to brand yourself as an enlightened person, and then you have to maintain that branding. You have to maintain that image. So once you paint yourself as that person, you put it out into the world and you're showcasing that, any flaw that you might have that still lingers, you're going to hide that. And I think a lot of people have a tough time with presenting themselves as this enlightened being. And then internally for themselves, that feeling of being enlightened goes away. And then they're suddenly back to kind of who they've always been with all of their flaws. But now, because of the book that they wrote, because of the interviews that they've done, the pictures that they've taken, the image that they put out as themselves, they have to try to maintain that. And they don't realize that the only way that they can actually maintain that is by continuing doing their sadhana. And a lot of these people, they actually abandon their sadhana. They actually stop doing their practice because then now they have to take on these other responsibilities. Now they have to schedule all these meetings and interviews. They have to write more books. They have to travel the world. They have to go to all these cities. And then they start to say, well, I don't have time to sit down for 2 hours and do my practice. I've got a meeting at 8 a.m. I've got an interview, a radio interview at 5 a.m. I've got to go and do this seminar. I've got to go and do this thing at this community hall. I've got to, suddenly they're out and about doing all these things, being that enlightened person that they've said they were and being the image, yet internally, they're still the same shitty person. And that same shitty person starts to leak through, and it eventually starts to poison the image that they've been trying to uphold. And that can come through as, sexual harassment. They meet this beautiful woman, they meet this other beautiful woman, they meet this other beautiful woman, and they're just like, oh my God, I'm just like, all of this, is being thrown at me, and how am I supposed to say no? Like the temptation that suddenly they're faced, that image of that enlightened being wasn't prepared for that, because their enlightened experience was in their room or in a cave somewhere, and they were just by themselves and they saw God for a brief moment, and then they come out of it and they're like, oh my God, I'm an enlightened person. I got to tell all these people about this beautiful experience and what life is about, and I can really influence people. And then suddenly now they have 10,000 followers, 15,000 followers. They're doing seminars to 2,000 to 3,000 people at a time, and they're getting flooded by attention. And they realize my enlightenment didn't actually prepare me for this. The enlightenment was just this brief moment of seeing something greater than myself. And now that I'm interfacing with what's greater than myself, I can't even handle it, because it's like when you're sitting in the dark and you turn on a light, and that light is super bright. It fills the whole room. You're staring at the light, and then the light goes off and you're in the dark. But there's an after image of that light bulb, and it stays for a while and it stays for a while, and then it slowly diminishes, and then it's gone, and then you're back in the dark. But you don't remember how the light even turned on. You can't find the light switch. You're just back in the dark. That's what I think is happening to these people that have an enlightened experience, is that a light is turned on, but they're not the ones who turned it on. And there was an after image of their enlightenment and it stuck around for a little bit, but now they're just back to themselves in the dark and they don't know how to turn it on because they've forgotten that the tools that they've had all along is what prepared them for that light turning on, but they're not using those tools anymore. If anything, they've gotten out of shape. It's been 10 years and they're just not conditioned to be able to handle suddenly an enlightened experience coming to them. And they just don't have that enlightened experience. I guarantee if you talk to any of those people and you go, okay, has this happened again? I guarantee they'll choke up and they'll have some excuse and they'll say, oh, well, yeah, it happened a long time ago. But ask them, did it happen recently? I guarantee none of them will be able to answer that. And that goes into even some of the modern mystics that you have today. This kind of goes into the later end of the third wave, which is like another one, like Nityananda, like Paramahansa Nityananda. Again, self-proclaimed enlightened being, had some powerful enlightened experience when he was 22. And then he started traveling all over India, making ashrams here and there, and he proclaims that he's discovered like 400 cities, that he was able to stop the sunrise or stop the movement of the sun for like 40 seconds or something, and that he has all these powers. But if you were to go to him and you say, hey, do you remember that experience that you had when you were 22? And he was like, oh, yes, I had this profound mystical experience. I saw God and, Babaji gave me my name, blah, blah, blah. And if you go, okay, has that happened again? When did that happen again? And I almost guarantee you that he would not be able to recount any other subsequent time. And that's because that's the nature of the enlightened experience. It's not something that is controllable. It's not something that you sit down and you go, okay, I'm having my enlightened experience today. The purpose of the yoga practice is to prepare you for a spontaneous, out of nowhere experience of communication or whatever. And the point is for you to be motivated to continue your sadhana practice as often as you can. Especially being a Westerner, it's hard to justify doing a strong yoga practice every single day when you just have responsibilities as a relatively young person in life, with work, with school, with family, whatever obligations that you have. There's some things that just come up spontaneously where you're going to have to spend that time on whatever responsibilities you have. But to the best of your ability to continue doing a sadhana practice is still going to allow you to prepare for that enlightened experience. But that doesn't mean you do what these guys did. That doesn't mean you have that experience and suddenly you go, okay, now I have to go around the world telling people of my experience and trying to gain followers and making as much money as I possibly can off of it. That, I think, is the signifier of the change here that's happening in the world, and how this like next wave of yoga can actually be a wave of really no focus on popularity, no focus on making massive amount of money, no focus on gaining followers. That you are now in a position to have access to so much material. You have access to so much information through the internet, so many books, so many resources, that you can put together a sadhana and you can have access to really authentic teachers without even having to meet them. Like, you can go to the Ashtanga Yoga Institute and you can do Vishwaji's classes and you don't even have to meet the dude, but you can still get the transmission and you can see that there's this light that's coming off of him and there's this genuine authenticity of his teachings. You can go to Nityananda's stuff. You can go even back to Yogananda stuff, Vivekananda stuff. There's all these teachings that to me are genuine, that there's still a transmittance of who they are as a teacher and as a guru without having to even really interact with them. And you can have your own sadhana and do your own practice to benefit your life and the people around you without having to be caught up into this whole cult thing. And that's really the message that I want to put out. The thing that I want to promote is self-mastery is key here. The most important thing is self-mastery. That you're doing the yoga practice and you're doing the sadhana and you're taking on these practices for your own self-mastery. And it's self-mastery just simply means that you are investigating what this body is. You're investigating what your limitations are. You're investigating why your body is the way that it is, why you have tension and tightness and stiffness in parts of the body, and what does it take to unravel it. And that's then the whole thing about the asana practice and why it's so important, that it's not just so that, ooh, I can be flexible and touch my toes and I can be strong and fit and I can look really good. That's just going to happen naturally. Your body is going to transform and it's going to turn into something that you enjoy more than if you were out of shape and unhealthy. And so inevitably over time with an asana practice, you are going to become healthier and you are going to have more energy and you're going to be able to live a better life because of the shape that your body is in. But that's not the point of it. The point is to investigate the inner workings of this mechanism that we call a body, this biological technology, and what its capabilities are energetically, so that you can sit in meditation and you can call out to something divine for you to have an enlightened experience. And that's really what this comes down to, is the asana and the pranayama and the sadhana practice is this preparation so that when you do sit in meditation, you are transmitting a signal out. You're using your energy to put it out. And as if you're sending a beam of energy from your sacrum through your spine, up the crown of your head and out. And that signal gets picked up. And there's a transmittance back to you of a communication that you're suddenly shown something. You're suddenly told something about yourself, about your life. And it's mysterious and it's cloaked in this kind of unknown realm. And it's so appealing and it's so empowering. And to me, it's from that point on, whatever small glimpse that you have or something even more profound that you realize from that point on, your life is going to change, but then you are still the driver of your life and you can still make positive changes in your life, in your family's life, your friend's life, in the world's life, without having to start a fucking cult. That's why I think it's so amusing when people still revere Osho, and it's look how it ended. Look how it ended. It didn't end well for him. So why still revere him? Look at Bikram. It didn't end well for him. People these guys who take advantage of people and, do crazy and terrible things, it didn't end well for them. So why still revere them? I revere Yogananda because it ended well for him. He wasn't in the middle of controversy and suddenly everything was taken away from him and he was abusing his students and women. No, he legitimately ended his life on the spot in front of hundreds of people, went into Mahasamadhi, left his body. His literal last words were, "I'm done. I'm out of here. Like, he literally told the group of people, like, it's time for me to go. I'm leaving right now. Left. So there's a difference between someone like Yogananda, who was proven an advanced master yogi mystic, to someone like Osho, who was not. It's like you have Yogananda, who had had profound enlightened experiences all throughout his life, to Osho, who had one when he was young, to Nityananda, who had one when he was young. And they're just riding the coattails of that image that they branded, right? Where someone like Yogananda, there's no need to brand an image. He was just displaying himself as a powerful yogi, and it was largely evident when you read his books. Like, he's highly intelligent, and it's even now when I go through his Bhagavad Gita book, and it just blows my mind what he knew and his capability of writing these things. And you come out of it feeling charged, and I think with, someone like Osho, and I haven't read his books, but when I have like read through material like his, it's almost draining. Like, yes, it's inspiring, and there is this profound sense, but I feel like I'm being pulled into it. I feel like there's something that wants me out of it, where when I read Yogananda's, it's like giving to me. It's a totally different sense. It's like the book and the material is giving to me and who I am. And that's much more profound than reading, a book that is trying to convince you to join their cult. And so, my work as a yogi, not only to teach people to move their bodies and use proper alignment, to get in touch with their breath, is also to say, hey, do these things for yourself. Ignore the people that say, hey, come and follow me and join this thing. And, there's this fellow on Instagram who's a Hare Krishna. And as great as it sounds to go and buy a property outside of a city and create, like an eco village, it has that energy, like I can't remember what his name is, but just by talking about it, my phone's probably going to pick it up and show me it later, but I'll come across his posts and they're like brilliantly done, like his marketing and the video style and everything. And he always starts the video like, me and my brothers are trying to buy this plot of land, like 600 acres, and we're going to start an eco village, and we want all you to come and live on this eco village, and it's going to have this and this and this, and it's going to be away from modern society. And like, that sounds great. And until you buy the property and until it starts to happen, there's going to be a point where you're starting a cult, and it's going to be a cult. And inevitably, someone internally is going to taint all of that. And that's exactly what happened in the Hare Krishna movement, when Prabhupada came, and he had a disciple that did terrible things, and so it's almost inevitable. So on my side, I'm like, no. Take the teachings, do the work yourself, do the meditations, you'll have a profound experience. And then see that that's a part of your evolution as who you are as a person, that is very personal. And it doesn't have to involve other people. It can be completely subjective. It doesn't have to be objective at all to the outside world. you can sit in meditation, an hour can go by, and you can open yourself up to a whole other realm of experience, and you can see your guides come through, and you can have a communication and a conversation with some kind of version of yourself that's saying, hey, look at these parts of your life. Do you really want to do this? Do you really want to do that? Or do you want to do this? In my case, back in 2016, one of my most profound kind of enlightened experience was just a conversation that came through showing me the direction that I was going in my life. I was running a business with my brother, doing home renovations. I was also trying to be in full-time school at university, and I was part of a conscious community here in Edmonton, and I was teaching yoga. And in this moment of sitting in meditation, this voice comes through and says, look, you have to make a choice. I know you're wanting to go back full-time into university, but you're also running a construction company. You can't do both. You have to pick one. What is it going to be? And in that moment, I was like, well, I want to do both. And this voice, very clear voice, and it was more of a feminine voice, was like, no. Think about the trajectory of your life then. Okay, you go to school full time. That means you're going to be doing schoolwork 18 hours a day. You're trying to do full-time studies, 5 classes a term. You're not going to have time for anything. You're not going to be able to work. You're not even going to have time for your friends. You're going to meet a whole new group of friends. Your whole life is going to change to finish this degree. So what is it going to be? Are you going to do full-time school and finish your degree in philosophy and go in that direction? Or do you continue working this construction company, working with your family, helping your dad out, helping your brother out, still staying with the community that you're a part of? Because you're going to have to let go of one or the other. And I was like forced to make a choice. And I looked up to this voice and I was like, I don't know what to do. And then the voice went silent and went, I'm going to choose for you. You're not going to university anymore. You're going to stop that. You're going to continue this job. You're going to continue working with your family. You're going to continue with this community. And instead, you're going to go to India in November. And right in that moment, it's like there was this burst of like little bit of light in me that sparked this immense excitement that just shot through me. And I was like, yeah, that's right. I could go and do my 300-hour teacher training. And in that moment, the voice was like, look, you can spend the next 3 years finishing your degree and put yourself in $50,000 to $60,000 worth of debt, or you can work really hard, save up for the training and the travel to India. And in that 2 months of doing a teacher training, you can learn so much more than in the next 2 years of finishing your degree. And you can immediately get into teaching yoga and making an income from it. And it was right in that moment, communication stopped, came back to myself, and I made a decision right then and there. And before that even stopped, this voice was like, who are you doing this for? Who are you doing it for? Are you doing it for yourself? Are you trying to finish your degree for you? And in that moment, I was like, no, I'm doing it for my dad. And this voice was like, exactly. You don't have to do that anymore. It's okay. You can do the thing for yourself and everybody will understand. And so when that whole experience ended, I made the decision, okay, I'm not going to go to university. I'm just going to focus on the business, focus on the community, go to India. I ended up going to my dad afterwards and saying, you know what? I'm not going to do university anymore. I remember seeing his face. He was a little bit shocked. And I was like, listen, I don't want to put myself in debt. And I want to focus on the business. And I want to make sure that we're all good as a family. Because if I stop all that and I just focus on university, who are you guys going to get to replace me to work? right? Like that's going to have more of a negative impact. And I remember my dad just looking at me, he's saying, yeah, I understand. That's actually a good decision. And I'm glad that you're mature enough to make that decision and everything's going to be okay. And it was a huge pivotal turning point. So that's an example where you can have an enlightened experience. You can come in contact with something divine. You can have divine guidance, and it can translate to bettering your life and bettering the life of the people around you in your family and your friends. It doesn't have to be this whole big outstretched thing that now, oh, I need to like go and tell the masses about my profound experience. Because, you know, ever since I was 12 years old, I've been having profound experiences, but I've come to the realization that the greatest wisdom in those experiences is to help it shape your self-mastery and help it shape your life as a spiritual person, because that's what's really going to matter in the end. That when you transition out of this life, that you're going to be able to look back and say, you know what? I did the best that I could, and I utilized my life in a spiritual way, and I feel blessed because of that. And you know what? If through those enlightened experiences, you gain the opportunity to help other people, that's great. Just know that you will be tested and you will be exposed to people who want to take advantage of you, and you will have to have your wits about you to make sure that you are surrounded by the right people. Because I think in the case like of Osho, in the end, he just wasn't. He was surrounded by people who wanted to take advantage of the power that he had and take advantage of the position that he was in. And look what happened, right? And then you see that in most of all the cults, is that inevitably someone internally is going to turn on you, and you have to be in a position where your inner circle of people are really well trusted people and they are genuinely good people, and the love that's there is authentic. I'm going to end it there. My next video or my next podcast is going to go into the end of the third wave and into the fourth wave, and what I think is the lesson of all of this and what the fourth wave is. And then after that, I'm going to go into the full podcast about asana and the importance of asana and what it really is. I just wanted to get these waves in there to get a good sense of the trajectory of yoga over the years and why it's become what it has now. And like, as you can see, like where it started in the first wave with just like planting the seeds of what yoga is, to then the second wave really showcasing the acrobatics of it, to the third wave of then like the twist of, you know, it turning into cults, and then the end of the third wave here in the area that we're in, and then into this fourth wave that it's now with the help of social media, that it's really turning into something really beautiful. And that even though, like, you know, there's still all the cults and there's still all the negativity, that there's a lot of good information out there, and there's a lot of good resources and outlets. Like for me here to make my podcast and put it out and to tell people like, hey, avoid cults, like don't join cults. Like as appealing as it is to join that community, don't do it. You have all of the internet to show you all of the yoga that you can ever find. You don't need to join a cult in order to find the secrets of this stuff. You can just find it, and you can have access to great teachers. And I will always recommend my teacher, Maharishi Vishwaketu. I'll put a link to the website as well too, so you can have so you can see the Akanda online, and then what he offers as workshops and stuff. That there are authentic teachers out there that have nothing to do with cults, and you know, that's luckily, that's exactly how Vishuji operates, that he's like, no, don't follow me around. He's like, I have my own life. I have kids. I have my own life. Don't come and follow me. Just come to the ashram, spend a few weeks, and then go back to your life. And that's what I love about that. And thank you for listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Enjoy.